What is up, Glinkers?
Today we're going to make you feel insecure about your accomplishments and look at the absolute chads of game development. We're going to look at BioWare, Bungie before they fell off a cliff, and some others. This chapter is called Development Hell, because it was, they went through development hell. That's the point. Okay. BioWare has been through many tough situations before and still made it out great. But there were two situations where they were given less than 2 years and very little direction to deliver a good product. But surprisingly, they did. With Fallout New Vegas being made in 18 months, it was pretty impressive what they came up with. They made it using the test script, which is actually not a standard programming language and was not case sensitive, so it made it a lot easier to quickly make content without worrying as much about mistakes. And it made it a lot more flexible for the people coding the game. But the engine had a lot of problems too. It was extremely unstable, and because of the very short period over which the game was developed, they didn't have enough time to properly set up compiler optimizations. And the people working on the product had never used the engine before and quickly had to figure out how to develop it before the very short deadline. You would expect it to be an open world game with very little content, but surprisingly, it's not. I mean, it's the biggest Fallout game by far. The base game had 259 weapons and 4 separate endings. It had one of the most complex combat systems in all the Fallout games. In every material aspect, Fallout was the best out of the entire series. But it couldn't catch up with the debugging team. The amount of bugs in this game single-handedly take it off the top 10 games of all time. It was the same story with Knights of the Old Republic 2, having a relatively small team, 117, which sounds big, but it's still relatively small for a AAA game. And they developed it in 14 months, as opposed to the normal 3. And just like before, it was a critically acclaimed masterpiece with very limited funding and limited time. I believe my hypothesis is that the reason they were able to do this is because 1, they were very competent. 2, they were very compassionate about what they were doing. But 3, because they were developing the game so quickly, there wasn't time for office space bureaucracy. No one was micromanaged because they just had to get to it and get it done. So that is chapter 1. Now this one's funnier. This is chapter 2. I call it No Direction. So Bungie made Halo 1 over 4 years, but they didn't get much done until the last year when they added 90% of the original game. And then it went on to be the flagship game of the original Xbox, and it literally jump-started the 6th era of the console wars in the early 2000s. 3 years later, Halo 1's older, more troubled brother came out. Halo 2, as opposed to being made in 4 years, was made in 18 months on a completely new jam system, which was a modification of the system they used in Halo 1. But just like his new armor, it was not an improvement. It was held together by duct tape and loose aspirations, and often required twice the amount of work to get something done and not crash the game. The game's sophisticated features, like lighting and physics, were too complicated for the original Xbox to handle. They had a plan for a multi-team multiplayer, but it never came to fruition. And it also had huge hit registration issues and often didn't work as it should have. Players also experienced pixelated shadows on the PC version, which looked really ugly. And overall, the engine wasn't bad, by itself, but the original Xbox just could not handle it. It wasn't optimized well for the system it was using. And they kind of went through some development hell too with Halo 2, not just a short time period, but they ended up having to cut 50% of the original game before it came out. But it still had the longest campaign of all the Halos and arguably the best story of the entire franchise. And they also brought Xbox Live with it, which is the beginning of truly online multiplayer. So that was pretty cool. And they did it in freaking 18 months. And the only reason the story was a cliffhanger ending was because they didn't have enough time. The original script actually had them ending the story because they didn't know if they were going to get a Halo 3. So we ended up with that crazy cliffhanger ending, but they also added a a lot more enemies, but they didn't have time to balance them due to time constraints, making the Legendary on Halo 2 so unfair. The Sniper Jackals on Legendary would literally kill you in a third of a second. So in the end, Halo 2 is the hardest game in both actual gameplay and anyone who has the balls to actually try to mod it. Both Halos consisted of a relatively small number of developers who were very passionate about the stuff they created. Despite Halo 2's numerous technical and balancing problems, it's still a beloved classic, and a big part of many people's childhoods. Later, Ensemble Studios was ripped from their own project and told to make a Halo RTS, much to the dismay of Bungie. And Ensemble, they wanted to make their own project as they'd been making for many years, and they didn't want to be working on another company's IP. But they worked with what they had and made a really great Halo RTS, despite the years of work that had gone into the previous projects. The limitations put on them led to creativity and a lot of innovation, and they were very strict with the story because Halo 3 hadn't come out yet. So they had to be very careful about what they put in that, and they kind of just had to do their own thing. And they ran with it. Like, they made new Spartans, everything. Master Chief wasn't even in the game, and it was a huge success. Like, Halo fans loved it, and Ensemble fans loved it. So it was a good win. Oh, and last we have the chapter, I call this one Literal Hell, and it's a joke because we're talking about Doom. So yeah, the original Doom was highly revolutionary for its time, with like pseudo 3D graphics, dynamic lighting, variable lights, and a highly robust modding community and publicly shared source code. They used a 2.5D engine to load 3D levels on very limited hardware such as Intel 386 and 486 PCs. The game was not truly 3D. It was a series of 2D polygons called sectors, which had fixed floor and ceiling heights. The solution significantly reduced rendering complexity. It wasn't the first FPS, but it brought the genre further into the limelight than their previous title, Wolfenstein 3D, did. Although they also had a very small team, if there's any inspiration to take from the original Doom, it's that you don't need a giant team of people and millions of dollars to make a great game. You just need a very dedicated team that can work well within the limits of what they have. Because the limitations placed on you will probably lead to more innovation than you realize. With modern tools like Unreal Engine and Unity, there really is not a limit to the things you can make if you're willing to put in the time and the effort. The main difficulty of being in a small game development team is getting the word out, attracting an audience. There are $1 million companies that have thousands of employees and still make terrible games. You know what I'm talking about. It's not about the money. It's about the creativity and the care of people who make it. These games have some of the best reviews on Metacritic, and were also made in extremely difficult situations. And we're all generational milestones in gaming. And they all had huge technical issues too, but it didn't matter because they were fun. My sources for this were Wikipedia, a couple of Reddit posts, and some of the things I looked up just straight from Google and it just told me.